We often hear people say, I support free speech, but I don't support hate speech. And the question always arises, who interprets what that hate speech, what is hate speech and what is not hate speech? And this is sort of what this bill is trying to address. It's saying, well, in these certain situations, for certain people with certain characteristics, if we incite severe ridicule, contempt, convulsion, revulsion, etc., then this should be something that is punishable by the law. However, the problem, one of the reasons that Western civilization supports free speech is because we acknowledge that it's not there for discussing the nice things, it's there for discussing the things that are hard, the things that are really difficult to discuss, the things that go against what the consensus is. And I'll bring you to something very historical example of what at the time would have been probably incitement of severe ridicule. And it's back to the 16th century by a man called Galileo. Galileo had this, he picked up on the idea by Copernicus, on the idea that maybe the Earth is not the centre of the solar system, maybe the sun is. And he was investigated by the Roman Inquisition in 1615, and maybe the inquisitors these days might be called the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. But in 1615, they inquired into his beliefs around this strange idea that went against everything that modern science and religion believed at the time, and they concluded that his opinions were heretical. And nevertheless, he believed he was right. And he was right, of course, as we know today. The Earth does rotate around the sun. And he wrote another book in 1632 called The Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. And in this book, he ridiculed Pope Urban VIII for their belief that the Earth was the centre of the solar system. Galileo incited severe ridicule based on a protected characteristic. He ridiculed the Pope because of his religious beliefs. For this, Galileo was forced to recant for his heresy, and he spent the rest of his life in house arrest, under house arrest for the rest of his life. Effectively, he was punished for ancient forms of this sort of law that we're debating today. I'll bring you to another interesting example of why free speech is very important, and I will acknowledge that the protected characteristic in this case does not apply to this law, although I'm sure that if public health officials had a say in this law, they would consider their views and their beliefs as protected characteristics. But let's go to public health. Back in the early 19th century, there was a man named Ignaz Semmelweis, and he was a physician and scientist, and he worked in Austria. And he was very concerned about a condition at the time. Many women, unfortunately, passed away very soon after giving birth to children, and they used to call it childbed fever. And in the hospital that he worked, the mortality rate was somewhere in the order of 18%. Absolutely shocking by today's standards. Giving birth in the early 19th century was indeed a very, very risky thing to do. And he had and consider that this is before science had any idea of germ theory. We didn't know what germ theory was at the time. But he was a man with an inquiring mind, and he made an observation, or had a theory that he wanted to test in the maternity ward. And so he tested this theory. He asked doctors and nurses and people working in the wards to wash their hands. He asked them to wash their hands before dealing with the mothers that were about to give birth, the soon-to-be mothers that were about to give birth. The mortality rate in the hospital reduced from 18% to 2%. Outstanding results. But of course, germ theory hadn't been discovered yet. He just randomly figured this out through empirical observation. He'd figured this out. He was vilified by the scientific community. In fact, they considered him an outcast. He conflicted with the scientific establishment. They said there is no basis for your beliefs. This is quackery. This is pseudoscience. And in fact, he ended up getting committed to an asylum where, ironically, he died from an infection after he was beaten by the guards in the asylum. He died from gangrene. But many years later, Louis Pasteur, in fact, did discover the scientific basis and germ theory, and discovered that actually Semmelweis was very correct in getting doctors to wash their hands. It seems ridiculous these days, but back then it was a public health heresy to suggest that these esteemed doctors should have to do something as undignified as wash their hands before they help a mother giving birth. And Semmelweis effectively, well, again, like Galileo, he was incarcerated for speaking heresy against the medical establishment at this time. But this is a very important reason on why we must always allow free speech. We must not condemn everything. Now, I don't for a moment deny that there has been awful, awful things happen in Victoria. People have been vilified for their religious beliefs. They have been awful attacks. And many of the things spoken about today, people have spoken about arson attacks and threats and these sorts of things. Well, the good news is that arson is already illegal, and people should be prosecuted for arson. Property crime is already illegal, and people should be prosecuted for property crime, like drawing awful things on property. Making threats against people is already a crime. The police cannot keep up, especially with arson in this state, police cannot keep up with the crimes that are already happening. Now, what we are proposing here is to add an entire new branch of crimes that presumably the police can't keep up with as well, unless they've got a new division or something. I'm not sure how that's going to work or how much that's going to cost. And as has been pointed out by others, none of this has actually been tested yet, so it would be a very interesting situation. But I would point out this. There are many instances where these bad things have happened and the government has responded. The government has responded. And let's look at the track record of the government trying to legislate away hate in this state, because it is absolutely abysmal. Let's look at one that was, I've spoken about it before here and publicly. Back in 2023, there was some Nazis that invaded or ambushed or hijacked or whatever you want to call it, a protest that was happening in Melbourne. I was there, I saw it. I didn't actually know they were Nazis at the time. I just saw a bunch of dudes in black. I had no idea who they were wearing masks. They unfurled a banner and they performed the Nazi salute, the Roman salute. And as a knee-jerk response, the government said, we are going to, we're going to legislate away hate. We're going to ban the Nazi salute and ban the Nazi symbols, and that will help get rid of hate in this state. That will help, suppress these people. During my questioning in the committee stage of the bill, I asked the Attorney General, well, how will you judge success of this legislation? How will you judge whether you've actually succeeded? And I don't want to misquote her, but I'll paraphrase. Her response was something along the lines of, it will succeed if it's not used. It's a deterrent. We don't want people doing these things because they're offensive to other people. It's offensive when someone does the Nazi salute. People find it offensive, and it will be successful, hopefully, if it deters people and those people won't do the things that we are legislating against, and that's a successful thing. I had a very different view. My view was that the very people that they were trying to suppress would almost immediately take advantage of this and become martyrs and use it to recruit and to point out that actually the government does not support freedom, and the government, they can claim their much treasured status as a victim, try and put themselves as victims, and that's what I predicted was what would happen. And of course, I was right. Within hours of these laws coming into effect, we had someone charged with this, he was convicted, and they used it for recruitment. This did not help remove or combat right-wing extremism in Victoria in any way. In fact, it has backfired in the most spectacular fashion. And indeed, these same people that were watching that law and took advantage of that are watching this very law go through Parliament today. They want this to pass. If anyone here thinks that neo-Nazis or Islamic extremists are scared or worried about going to prison or being charged with these crimes, you need to think again. They see this, they see laws like this as a way of pointing out the hypocrisy of the state, which the state is hypocritical because they are going against the traditions of Western liberalism by not supporting freedom of speech, by trying to legislate away hate. And we're in a situation now where they are waiting to take advantage of this and make themselves martyrs and get a platform to spew their abhorrent views to the rest of the state. This is so utterly irresponsible and dangerous. And anyone that thinks that the government is serious about this only needs to look at what happened during the pandemic or what happened later after that Let Women Speak rally, where the government, who apparently, takes right-wing extremism very, very seriously, smeared anyone and everyone as Nazis. One of the most outrageous and hideous accusations to accuse someone of, unless it's actually true, they were smearing all sorts of people as Nazis. I cannot take them seriously when they've done that sort of thing. Even more recently, they were trying to smear the Liberal Party as somehow, associated with Nazis. And I tell you this, it didn't work. No one's buying it. No one's buying it. I notice the government stopped doing that now because it's not working. No one's buying it. The average Victorian just doesn't buy it. In fact, the government had been smearing people as Nazis for so long, everyone who disagreed with them, that no one knew what an actual Nazi looked like. And they're not very nice people, I can tell you. They're not very nice people. In fact, I'm one of the few people that's actually been pushing back against them on social media. Racism is an abhorrent ideology. The idea that it's one of the lowest forms of collectivism that you can imagine. And so we have this now where the government thinks that they can legislate away hate, and we have this potential now for all these, to give all these awful people a platform, both in the courts and potentially with High Court challenges. I note that there was a letter from the Scrutiny and Acts and Regulations Committee wondering whether this bill might actually infringe on the federal constitution. I'm sure there would be many bad faith actors very happy to take this right to the High Court, and they might win. How awful for this state, awful for the government, but awful for this state as well, if we did end up with a situation like that where they did win. I know that the government always seems very confident in their constitutional validity of the laws that they pass here, but they've lost a few of them. I know the electric car tax was one more recently. They seemed very confident of that at the time and then lost it. This could be the same. This is a very high-risk proposition that the government is doing here. I don't think that anyone should be supporting this. What we should be doing is standing firm on the principles that our civilization was founded on. We already have mechanisms for maintaining social cohesion, and that is defending individual rights, the freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of belief, freedom of association. We must stand proud and affirm these commitments to these freedoms, because the people that incite racism, that incite hatred, that attack these people, they hate these freedoms. They love it. They love it when governments collapse, when they turn their back on those freedoms that our civilization has protected for so long, because they can call us hypocrites, they can attack us and move us towards authoritarianism, which is what we do not want. Our state and our country must stand firm in defence of freedom, and the Libertarian Party will never back down from that.